For those of you who are familiar with us, thank you for joining yet another event. We're really happy to see you. For those of you who are new to ICF, just wanted to give a brief introduction. So we've been around for over 15 years, initially as the Microfinance Club of New York. And then we rebranded about 3 years ago as Impact Capital Forum, recognizing the need of all kinds of capital, financial, but as well as social and environmental and technological, to play a role at the intersection of finance and social good. We hold a lot of events per year. We have a new president, Carolyn Alwyn, who will be your moderator today. And so we've increased our event in the virtual event sort of schedule in the virtual space. We welcome anyone to join us. There's members and non-members. The Opportunity Zone specifically is a working group. It is open to members. If this is your first time joining, we're happy to answer questions about the working group format as well, which is slightly different from our regular event format. Our network is about 3,500 individuals. We are an individual membership-based organization, which is different from some other membership organizations in the space, which are institutional. So we welcome everyone. We have members who are impact investors, who are social entrepreneurs, people who are in traditional finance and interested in this space, and basically anyone who wants to join us and is interested in our content. So welcome. If you have any questions about Impact Capital Forum, please don't hesitate to reach out to info@impactcapitalforum.com. That goes to it will go to our entire board. So somebody will get back to you, or feel free to reach out to either Carolyn or myself directly. We can drop our emails into the chat. I will do that right now. And over to Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. We're so excited to host this event, an opportunity to have Greg speak with us. This is I realize that our Opportunity Zone working group has now been running for 2.5 years, which is very exciting just since the legislation emerged. And so we're excited to have this opportunity. And also we're having typically we meet monthly or bi-monthly, but we had the great opportunity of Greg, so we couldn't turn it down. And we also have the opportunity to have Steve Glickman and Ira Weinstein. I think is Ira not on the call, but Ira's maybe joining us today, speak about their latest book on opportunity zones. So that is next week for anyone who wants to overdose on opportunity zones. That is a great opportunity, as Steve and Ira have great insight into where the legislation came from, where it's going, and a great opportunity to ask any of your tax questions as you work on your projects in different spaces. So thank you so much. I will do the honors of introducing Greg, and then let Greg sort of introduce his project, and then we'll go into a bit of Q&A. So this working group format does enable all of us to see one another. So I guess if we could perhaps all mute, and then I will go ahead and mute everyone. So we do have some background noise. Let me just see. So I'll work on that as soon as I make this introduction to Greg. Let me just see if I can do that actually. I guess, I'm just gonna work on muting everyone. Hold on one sec. Oh, okay, all right, we got it. Okay, great, thank you so much. So Greg Stuppler and I met at an Opportunity Zone. It was an invitation only working group retreat ski resort at Powder Mountain back, I guess, about 2 years ago now. And it was just as the regulations were emerging, and it was held by Jeremy Keel and the Sorensen Foundation, as well as his colleagues out in Utah. So it was a great event and a great convening. And that is first where I saw Greg speak about his project. So I was so excited to have the opportunity to learn more about his projects and learn about all the great sustainable real estate he's engaged in. So Greg has more than 24 years of experience in real estate, private equity, and banking. He founded SURF Capital, which stands for Sustainable Real Estate Fund, in 2012 to invest in real estate projects that achieve social and sustainable impact. Today's SURF's focus is community redevelopment and ethical development in partnership with government and nonprofits. Since its inception, SURF and its partners have closed transactions valued at over $2 billion for itself and its clients. SURF's pursuits fit into 3 categories: sustainable hospitality, sustainable impact real estate, renewables, and reduction. So all those terms, feel free to, we'll see what we can do to define and what we really understand those terms to be, and we'll push Greg on that a little bit. With Greg and his vast experience in real estate, I have no doubt that he can answer and help us define some of these terms. And prior to launching SURF, Greg spent 10 years as a managing director and head of Asia at Starwood Capital Group. Before Starwood, Greg spent 5 years as managing director and investment committee member for PAG Real Estate and partner of Apollo and Lehman, APL. Greg has been involved in over $20 billion of investments, America, Europe, Asia, and Australia over his career. So thank you so much, Greg, for making time. And a special thank you to Alexis for helping us facilitate this. So we have, I guess everyone can see Greg's screen. Do you want to take it away, Greg?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'll pre-warn you that I'm doing this from my the lobby of my building here, and there's a blue bottle of coffee over there, open air. So if you hear grinding noises, my apologies. Coffee grinding. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I see a lot of friends on the list of participants. So I appreciate you guys coming out. This project I'm going to talk about today is located in Hempstead, New York. This has been a project that my partners and I have been working on since 2015. Hempstead is one of the densest commercial communities in Nassau County. So for those who don't know Long Island is this entire area here from Brooklyn all the way out about 90 miles to the tip of the Hamptons in a place called Montauk. And the large commuter areas are from, like, you can see my cursor on my screen, but this area that I'm circling here, which is Nassau County, and beyond it, Suffolk County. What's interesting about this is that this area has a population of about 2.9 million people, primarily commuters. So it's kind of a significant population of the world. What's interesting about Hempstead is that it is linked by the Long Island Railroad. First of all, you can obviously see it's close to JFK Airport. It's about a 15-minute ride to JFK. It's about a 45-minute train ride into Brooklyn Atlantic Terminals in downtown Brooklyn or Penn Station in Manhattan. Slide here. There we go. This is a kind of aerial shot of the area. This area we see project site is downtown, is the village of Hempstead. What's really interesting about this is that we're in immediate proximity to 4 major universities: Hofstra, Delphi, Malloy, and Nassau Community College. So this was really the commuter area where people, and the train station that is right here is where people come into to go to these universities. Traditionally, these universities were all commuter schools. People drove to them. Increasingly, they are filled with international students that look for housing, which is an interesting opportunity. You see here, we've got the 2 major train stations in the area: the Hempstead Long Island Railroad Station right next to our first site, and the Mineola Station up here. This area in between the 2 areas, so we have Hempstead right here. To the north, a very wealthy community named Garden City, and then up here, Mineola again. Just by comparison, the village of Hempstead is about 98% Hispanic and African American, with an average income of about $60,000 a year. Garden City, to the immediate north, is primarily Caucasian, with an average income of closer to $150,000 per year. And Mineola is mixed, a little more mixed than Garden City, but not quite as inclusive as Hempstead, and it has an average income of about $80,000 a year. This is our core thesis to our investments, that the entire downtown Hempstead area is one that is ripe for transit-oriented development. In the past 4 years, 3 projects have been built in Mineola right here, ranging from 5-story construction apartments to 11-story construction, and even a kind of luxury products. What's really interesting is that the rents here in Mineola, Long Island, are as high as $54 a square foot per year. That's comparable to prime Brooklyn these days, or even parts of Manhattan during COVID. So we'll get to the economics as to why as we go through the analysis, but there's basically a radical undersupply, hence the opportunity to build here. The history of downtown Hempstead is that, you know, it was led by a public-private revitalization effort led by Renaissance Downtowns. Renaissance was a company that my partners and I invested in 2015. And what they achieved through this public-private partnership was the rezoning of the entire downtown district of Hempstead. So do you guys see that? Kelly, do you see that dark green line that goes around the left picture here? So that's the downtown district. And what my partners did was they radically changed the zoning code. So prior to their involvement, the only buildings that existed, I mean, there's some 4-story buildings in town, but primarily it's 1 or 2-story retail. You know, car dealerships and other things are just not very don't create a lot of economic vitality. My partners rezoned it so the entire downtown could become a high density area with buildings 5 to 12 stories. And the idea was to create a democratic process where any individual landowner could benefit from their being able to build, you know, up to 12 times their existing entitlements. And the idea was that democracy would allow everybody and create economic incentives for everybody to build and for massive economic stimulus to funnel in. As part of that public-private partnership, my partners were granted an option to buy all of the municipal land. So the blue areas you see on both maps, it's the same map, but this one on the left is just a little more organized. You see basically all of this land, which is the majority of the dense downtown, is really the former parking lots. And my partners bought them all for an extremely advantageous price as a result of their efforts. Our opportunity zone deal is basically leveraging that portfolio and doing a 2-stage deal where we're going to build one of the first projects in town and then have options to acquire large chunks of the rest of the land portfolio. So the value we help create by building the first project will go towards the value creation of the rest of the land in town. So we help improve the downtown, you know, and then, you know, we'll theoretically reap the benefits by being the largest individual landowner. What's interesting about all of these project sites being parking lots is that, you know, they're really designed to create partnerships with the retail owners in front so that everybody has incentive. I think everybody can understand that this, you know, the basic real estate idea that if you have a 1-story building and you can turn it into a 8-story building, you have a lot of economic incentive to fold your project into the development. The other thing that's really important here to understand about Long Island and probably the nexus of the economic opportunity is that housing in Long Island has been historically, we'll call it non-inclusive. That's the nicest way to put it. The other way to put it is that the zoning code followed the general policies of white flight from New York City into the suburbs in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And, you know, Long Island had the same issues with redlining and discrimination as most places, perhaps more intense. But one of the areas where that was most pronounced was most communities' desire to restrict the development of apartments. So the concept of these neighborhoods was, you know, these are like the original, you know, U.S. suburbs. The concept was to prevent the bucolic suburbs from turning into Queens or extensions of Queens or Brooklyn or other areas where high density housing and, you know, more inclusive neighborhoods were normal. So today what that means is that Nassau and Suffolk County have 16 to 17% of their total housing stock in apartments and rental housing. I should say rental housing, it's not even all in apartments. And by comparison, Westchester County, so north of New York, is 37%. I think the national average is between 36 and 40%. So this is although we're 45 minutes from Manhattan, it's one of the areas with the least amount of rental housing. These estimates here of projected household formation come from a group called Vision Long Island. They estimate that there's a 94,000 unit shortfall of housing to new home formation between now and 2030. And more poignantly, there's, you know, based on demand statistics, there's about an 80% or 43,000 unit shortfall of walkable transit-oriented housing. The thing that's kind of weird is how high the rents are in this area, but because of that dearth of supply, rents in these areas were actually are incredibly strong, stronger than New York or Brooklyn during the same time zone. And while New York and Brooklyn and Queens and everything were plummeting during COVID, the apartments that we consider our most accurate comps in our neighborhood experienced rental increases. We think that's partially due to the fact that many people left New York, they moved a little bit out to the suburbs. And if you look here on the right, we were given access to the detailed rent rules for several of the comp buildings, and my team did rigorous work to turn names into LinkedIn profiles and Facebook profiles, turn names into demographics, and based on their work, you see here a very diverse population of people who live in the apartment buildings that are very close to our site. I thought this is pretty interesting. The Asian population and the younger population tend to correlate with people who are 3 to 4 people per apartment, living in 2-bedroom apartments, which most of them link to students at Hofstra and Adelphi. So the older people tend to be African-American, Caucasian, and then you get the other concentrations coming from the schools nearby. This is my team. We won't go through it, but a lot of great people. One guy that looks like he's missing just because he's still working at another job, joining us shortly. The Oz Deal Thesis here is that, and I'll skip over most of this, happy to share with anybody, but effectively we're raising a $24 million OZ fund targeted on that first project where our returns are 20% IRRs over 10 years. So, the way that we price the deal, keeping in mind that I have investors on both the new opportunity zone side and the historic side. So we basically negotiated a very engineered price targeting thorough underwriting and a 20% pre-OZ IRR. So this is one of the best returning, I think, individual project IRRs that I've seen in the OZ space. And it's been, our assumptions have been deeply vet at this point by our conversations with Brookfield, a group called BRP, and another group called NRP Group, 3 major multifamily developers that have kind of vetted our assumptions. And then we theorize that the option value that we have on the other land should be able to increase the total multiple returns to our investors from kind of the 4 to 5 range into the 6 to 7 range. So I think most opportunity zone deals that we've seen are targeting returns above 3 times multiple. We think this is potentially, if we're right, we think that this is as much as twice the returns over 10 years. The way that we're creating incentives for people to come into our deal is that I'm putting in 50% of the first closing at $8 million, and we're inviting other family offices that we're close with to put in $1 to $2 million each. We're looking for large family offices that, as we expand the portfolio, are people that will want to keep investing towards the growth of this community. Underwriting the deal. This is our first project is a basic building. We think it's going to cost us $180 million to build. We think it's going to be worth $230 million when we're finished. With income and leverage, we think the returns are exceptional. Here's just a whole bunch of returns on the page. If our rents are lower, they're good. If they're higher, they're better. You know how it works. That's kind of the background of the economics. What I really wanted to spend more time on today was what our impact thesis was, because I think that's more the intent of today's conversation. Before I go on though, Carolyn, do you have any other questions to ask or things that I should, maybe ran through too quickly?
No, I mean, all of it is, you and I are fast talkers. And so, but I do encourage, so this working group format is set up as, intentionally it's intimate. So we have 28 people with us today. And so it's intentioned to encourage discussion and conversation and questioning. So shall there not be any, I have a list of questions to play moderator, but I do encourage people to raise their hands, put questions into chat, or just feel free to interrupt Greg or myself.
I'll just go on. So this whole project was, began with a real estate social impact thesis. And my partners at Renaissance Downtowns, the original founders of the concept that we invested in 2015, innovated a concept which they called crowdsource placemaking. And this was one of the most interesting things that we had seen in the kind of impact space. And I'll give full credit where it's due. My partner, Neil Takamoto, came up with this idea of using social media as a tool to foster discussion with the community and make a process of planning and re-entitling a downtown district something that everybody in the village could participate in. And in doing so, we would get more community buy-in, and we would have a lot more sense of participation and sense of inclusion. That process was extremely successful. The way that my partners got the access to this overall portfolio was by running a request for qualifications process where the Village of Hempstead created an open invite for people to propose revitalization strategies. And during the 6 months from the announcement to the presentations, Neil and a guy named Don Monty and other colleagues got sort of on social media. This thing on the left is great. It's basically just saying that they targeted direct contact with the people in town they thought were the most socially tied in. And then they used those people as a megaphone to get about 5,000 people in the community actively engaged in the redesign of the town. So by the time the village had its presentations on who they should hire to do the revitalization, Neil and their colleagues had already been doing design charrettes with 5,000 local residents who all showed up at the town hall meeting to say that Renaissance should be selected, which they then were. We've had some challenges, probably with some momentum over the last several years, which I can go into if people want to, and some challenging politics by some Republican Party members that have been anti-development. But I guess the overall dynamic here is that my partners created a deep expectation that these projects would lead to social impact, and that's kind of my responsibility now if SURF takes over the helm to develop this property. What's really interesting is that Hempstead, to people who live on Long Island, Hempstead has a reputation as being a less safe community. We'll get to, I think, what the truth of that is on the next slide. But what was intentional about the zoning code here was to take a town that's gray, and where parts of the town from the train station to the north, I just called it low activity. And by designing into the code a requirement that all new buildings create a sidewalk setback, tree-lined streets, and what you call activated storefronts. So whether it's a retail store or something else, the first floor has to be translucent and lit. So you basically create an urban dynamic. And then the zoning code allows almost anything to be built from the second floor up to the 12th floor in different areas. So you can build hotels, assisted living, obviously market rate housing and affordable housing. You can do anything you want so long as you create this safer, more attractive streetscape. There have been a lot of studies done on this, whether it's walkability, an active commercial corridor, or even tree lining. All of them collaborate to creating actual improvements in public safety. So that's what we call safety by design. And then I think there's a rebranding effort of Hempstead. We did a lot of research using something called Security Gauge, which is part of Core Logic. And what they do is they do I don't know exactly the scale, but they basically map all crimes that occur in an area, and they will give you a detailed rundown of the different crime rates by category: vandalism, armed robbery, larceny, assaults, theft, rape, burglary, homicide. And what's really interesting here is that Hempstead has this horrible perception for being a dangerous place, but it's not. So if you see here, like US average is like mid-green, with the safest areas in dark green and the most dangerous in 5. Just to create a comparison, we ran the same test here on downtown San Francisco So this is where the fort, like it's centered on the St. Regis Hotel. And you can see the difference between the relative safety of Hempstead versus, 625 Market Street in San Francisco. All right. So I think, part of our project here is just to change the reputation. And I'll go here and I'll say this, and I don't want to be controversial, but I think the reputation for Hempstead having a high crime rate comes from two fundamental misunderstandings. One is that the village of Hempstead sits within a much, much larger town of Hempstead. The town of Hempstead has like 22 villages and 37 hamlets. And within the greater town of Hempstead, there have been crime waves in the past 20 years, including gang violence from the Bloods and the Crips, and then more recently from MS-13. That activity is way down from where it's been, and the state has done a lot of work to stymie it. But at the same time, it's really misbranding. It's not in the village of Hempstead. Hempstead does have significant challenges with its public schools, and we hope that our project helps radically to move towards that. The village of Hempstead's high school, for example, ranks on great schools at only a 3 of 10 ranking. It's one of the worst in Long Island. As part of the solutions to that challenge, the village introduced Academy Charter Schools over the past 5 years. And the Academy Charter School, which is located like very close to our site, has a ranking 8 out of 10 in grade school. So it's one of the best in the area. Admissions to the school are beneficially granted to Hempstead area people, and so far the performance of these schools is doing exceptionally well on a relative performance basis, including the fact that they show almost no distinction in performance between the students who are kind of deemed low income, and the measures, whether they're on the free and subsidized lunch programs, and the other students. One of the key challenges in Hempstead is the fact that this downtown district has been largely, because it's mainly parking lots, has been largely non-revenue generating. So the schools just don't have enough revenue because it's a slightly lower income, lower home value community, and it's already stressed by real estate taxes. So when we build out our project, even net of tax abatements that we're looking for, our first project will add $2 to $4 million a year in the school levies from our building that will go directly to the schools. And the entire downtown redevelopment is projected to generate an additional $50 million a year for those schools. What's important to note in that kind of additional revenue is that we do not expect that a significant portion of our apartments are going to be rented by families. We think that the statistics show that it's millennials, younger people, and empty nesters that will primarily move into this housing. As a result, we think that our projects will create a significant net economic benefit to the school district. In addition to that, and I'll ping on to it a little bit later, we're in discussion with the head of economic development right now about a trade-off where we would get tax abatements for our project in exchange for us building an early age education center at our first project. If you see our first project here, it's right next to the train station. So the idea is that we would have a subsidized early learning project, which would work well with commuting parents to drop the kids off and pick them up here. We started this project in 2015, when SURF was probably more focused on environmental sustainability than social impact. What's really important to understand here is that New York and Brooklyn are fairly friendly to the environment. You see here, these are tons of carbon per household. And the urbanized areas of Manhattan and Brooklyn generate 32 metric tons of carbon, where when you get to Hempstead, it's, because of the housing population, it's 47.5. And when you go further out on the island, it's almost double New York City. This is primarily because people drive. And people, typically live in large houses, which are very energy inefficient. So when we were doing this project, we said, look, we have an opportunity here to build high density housing and build walkable communities around transit in the suburbs. So we thought that was inherently sustainable. In addition to that, however, my partners made sure that the zoning code was designed to be LEED neighborhood development rated. And they worked to create a zoning code which reduced the amount of parking that you have to either replace or parking that you have to add to a building. So traditionally in Long Island, if you build one apartment, you build 2 parking spaces. In Hempstead, we're going to be able to, for every apartment we build, that drops to 1 parking space, and we hope that we can drive it even lower. As part of that, we are going to be building shared parking schemes.
Sure.
We're building shared parking schemes into the design. Some of our investors asked us to do diligence with respect to our environmental resilience. Fortunately, although a lot of Long Island, New York, Manhattan, and Brooklyn are going to be underwater by 2100, Hempstead should be fine. So Hempstead looks good in terms of all of our resiliency checks, which was important to our investors who are long-term investors. And then the whole concept of this downtown revitalization is to create jobs, attract infrastructure grants, attract economic benefits and revenue that can just help the city's different municipal endeavors. Directly speaking, we've agreed to do 30% local construction hire. So all of our construction is going to hire 30% of our workers locally. And we've also paid and committed to continue paying an $8 million grant for community impact efforts, which are, kind of fun stuff from art programs to community, picnics in the summer and different things. Some of that money has gone to COVID relief efforts, during the last year. And then as we're negotiating right now for tax breaks, we're also having direct discussions with the people in the village about 3 projects, which are, I guess, important to the local development agency. One, as I said, is early age education programs and helping them expand them. 2 is that we've got about 7 acres of land that sit directly behind the only 2 derelict buildings that are on Main Street. These derelict buildings are derelict because of the owner, not because of rental demand. And the idea would be that we would knock these down and combine this with our land into a massive redevelopment site. And then there's something called the Calderon Theater, which has a lot of history in Long Island. Way back before there were regional malls and everything, if you lived in the suburbs around this area, you would come to the village of Hempstead to go to the theater. And the most famous one was this Calderon Theater. Now it sits tucked behind the Academy Charter School, and they've asked us to see if we would donate some money and help them rebuild that project. So those are all the things that we're doing. We have a heavy lift in front of us in terms of all the things that we're promising and promised to deliver to people. And we think that with further participation and support from the village, that it's something that we're going to be able to deliver on, and I think deliver better than I've seen returns from other OC projects.
Great, thanks, Greg.
That's the summary.
And no loud espressos in the background. So you were clear. I guess if anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, I can start going through a list of some questions just to get the conversation started. I guess, why don't we start with the returns? Can you just go back to that slide? Have you noticed a bump up with the OZ legislation? And what is the IRR bump up that you're seeing as a result of, and maybe even take a step back and talk to us about how this capital stack may be different from your other projects because of the OZ legislation? Are you talking? We can't hear you. I know we like to mute you sometimes, Greg, but
my team likes to mute me. So if this page was showing the returns before opportunities on tax benefits, the box here right in the middle would be at 20%. I think the low end of this range here is probably around 12%, and the high is probably around 26%. This reflects the deferral of our investors' taxes from 2021 to 2026, and a 10% reduction in those taxes, as well as the fact that, and I've seen people do this in many different, I've seen opportunity zone funds calculate the tax benefits in a lot of different ways, because it's theoretically, there's some theoretical options in how you articulate the fact that if you hold these investments for 10 years, you do not have tax on the exit, on the capital gain from the exit. The way we calculate this is we look after tax, and we basically look at the fact that most of our investors' income is going to be sheltered through depreciation through the course of their ownership. And at the back end of the deal, under a normal project, the depreciation, which shelters your dividends during the holding period, your depreciation catches back up with you. So if you were to depreciate half of your building over your holding period, when you sell it for the same price you bought it for, you're paying capital gain tax on 50% of the value, if you guys follow that. So effectively, by allowing our investors to depreciate, to take depreciation benefits against their income over the years, and then at the end sell without having any capital gain tax, that adds a 4 to 5% return kind of across the board. What we think is different about this deal than other deals is that most other deals kind of, you build a project and then you hold the project for longer than you would have normally wanted to. And with our project, the core concept here is that we're going to be able to refinance the first project and use those proceeds to do additional developments, given the fact that we've got this large land portfolio. So if we're correct, the first project earning a very high rate of return will then just kind of replicate itself as we add new projects. And so the result being that whether we sell the additional land parcels or whether we develop them, we're going to be able to generate this extra return, and extra capital gain, which is just not normal for most OZ funds.
So how do you plan for this exit exactly in the time frame that you need, that you want to comply with the regulations? I mean, do you have any exit strategies in mind?
So about half of my limited partners are family offices that are basically putting their kids' trust funds and something like it into the deal. And a lot of them have New York area real estate experience and just have a bias never to sell the real estate. And so I think half of the people probably want to hold indefinitely. I mean, I think this is an improving area, and it'll just be an attractive rental yield. The other half are asking me questions about whether we could sell earlier. So one of the key features that we made different about this project is that everybody is going into the investment through their own individual opportunity zone fund. And all of those different OZ funds are investing in one partnership vehicle. And for the first investors, for the first 60 million investors, I'm putting in half of that capital. So the combination of having the freedom to operate their own fund and to have kind of probably significantly more sponsor investment than other deals, I think that made people feel very confident. And because of the options that we have on the future land, and because of the fact that we're both going to have opportunities to either use debt or equity to capitalize the vertical development, and we have opportunities to look, like we'll have inside information. We'll know exactly what we're building when, so we'll know which projects in the area around us that we want to target for acquisition. So there's also going to be a traditionally used opportunistic real estate in terms of buying things strategically. So all of those things are going to collaborate. So the family offices that are working with us will have options to put in additional money in 22, 23, 24, and expand the investment. One of the other things that we're doing is that we're saying to our investors, if we have debt, we're allowing them to make OZ investments as preferred equity, which would be senior to our equity in the normal equity, but priced in a way that is more closely mimicking debt. Therefore, if they just want to shelter more money in our project, we can do it by taking their preferred equity rather than leveraging up the project, if that's kind of makes sense. And several of our investors really like that.
Great. It's interesting to hear they're coming in through their own QOZs because that's administratively costly. I know firsthand.
Well, several of them already had their own QOF with profit opportunity funds.
But to manage that is risk, with the guidelines constantly shifting, and then the IRS just extended it again, extended the timeline.
All of our guys kind of like it. They all like getting super geeky. They love saving on their taxes, so it's a fun exercise for them. For the guys that don't understand it as much, we've set up SURF managed QO, qualified opportunity funds, where they put 99% of the money in and we just put 1% of the money in as administrator. And so 2 of our investors are like that, but most just have their own funds already.
Interesting. And then how has that been to educate, part of the primary mission of this working group is to help disseminate information in an efficient way to increase the capital flow into this space. And so we've all been hard charging in the past few years to do that. But how have you found your process of educating your potential MPs, unlocking that capital? Is it a longer sales cycle? Is the cost of capital cheaper because maybe it's shorter, and other benefits?
I invited a couple of my LPs to this call. I don't know who's on it. I would say that it's incredibly frustrating. It's been like herding cats. The nature of this project is a little more complicated than some, but what we found is that mainly because I wanted to retain control of it, it's been hard for me to go to a single investor, like a single large investor, like my former partners at Starwood Capital or RXR or other people who have the large funds. And so when we're dealing with investors, they are typically very sophisticated people that I've met through my personal network. And so some of them have been ad hoc with respect to their knowledge or the depth of their experience in real estate. Once I started putting together a core group of people, I think a lot of others especially guys who are real estate experts from Manhattan, I think other people decided that they were feeling confident enough to join. But that process has been very difficult. And one of my strategies here, which is very purposeful in kind of setting the target of having 8 family offices with investments that represent like $1 to $2 million each, but represent about 1/10 of their opportunity zone appetite, has been to try to attract people that I thought I could have good established a trusting relationship with and have a lot of follow-on investments. That's kind of been my subtle strategy. So, and for a handful of my LPs, when they're analyzing my deal, they send me their 7 other candidate deals that they're looking at. And then I've run around New York diligencing their other deals so that I could line up their deal next to mine and do comparisons. So I've done an ungodly amount of work, pro bono work, to make sure everybody is feeling comfortable about this deal. It's been hard, is the short answer.
It's a bit of an uphill battle to educate as well as you're trying to pitch the investment opportunity. And so a few questions that had come in prior to the session were focused on impact. And so if you could just go back to your impact measurement slides.
I don't think I have a measurement slide on here, but yeah.
The CO2 emissions, the job creation. I guess it's as close to measurement as we can get in this conversation. Well, so when I say that to you, does that make you think that you're not measuring?
No. Just we haven't really started yet. So the baseline for we'll track the baseline for all of these things, and I think we'll just look at the UN. The UN sustainability goals as the key. I don't have one of the slides up here that everyone has with all the little colorful boxes, but we'll track the baseline and all that stuff, and we'll be very rigorous. SURF used to have an impact officer dedicated to Hempstead. She decided to get married and move to Dubai, so we haven't rehired a direct officer yet, but we will when we're fully running.
You had a great slide on job creation and CO2 emissions here. So, I guess these aren't necessarily measurements on the outcomes, but they are sort of. So I guess talk to us about this. Is this typical in your sustainable real estate projects, or is this something different you're doing for OZs?
So most of the projects that I'm working on are in some way tied to a partnership with the municipal government or partnership with nonprofits. And in that regard, most of the projects require this thing called a community benefits agreement. So a developer of a piece of land, like seeking certain approvals or tax breaks or different from the community, will make certain promises for local hiring or permanent job creation as a result of the projects. And I think that's fairly typical in impact real estate. I think our project, it's kind of hard to distinguish how much money actually went to the community here, because we had a lot of political pushback because, well, my partners and I spent about $36 million in the process of building the land portfolio. The actual transfer price between the municipal government and us for 33 acres was $1. And so this $8 million promise was part of our decision to kind of soften the politics, because it just, although we spent a ton, that wasn't transparent in the purchase price. I mean, it was consulting, it was legal work, it was, a lot of man hours of labor on our team. And nonetheless, as soon as we bought the land, as soon as my partners bought the land, we had an immediate political pushback where some anti-development residents sued us, claiming that we didn't have a good title to the land because it was kind of theft. And it took us, the main delay since 2016 when we started this process in earnest, has been 3.5 years of lawsuits to prove that we own the land. So we did defend that lawsuit, and then we had to defend an appeal. So this process is all happening after we've made it through some pretty hostile anti-development politics.
And so just following up on that impact question, one of the other questions that had come in was, how do you communicate impact, or how do you envision communicating impact to your LPs, or maybe the LPs that you've recruited in these family offices are more focused on the IRR? And maybe that's the answer to the question.
I'd say it's half and half. I mean, I think, nobody's met me and survives, having a plastic straw near them. So I think I wear my ideals on my sleeve. And so people understand that, the impact and the sustainability efforts are going to be really important to me. And I think that's hopefully why working with you might be attractive. But, we're basically going to be presenting to them semi-annual and annual impact statements on what we're doing with the community. But I think probably more relevant than the impact achievement that we're going to be marketing to our partners, we're going to be doing a lot of it between us and the community itself, because it's really the reality of the positive change that we're going to create on the ground that is going to, let me just actually jump back. Let me describe this in a different way, a really simple way. If you look at this land bank here, and then you look at the first project site that we're doing, most of our land and most of our value is happening later. And so if we don't deliver an attractive project which helps improve to a perception of the town, and if we don't deliver on the impact things that we say that we're going to, we're not going to get the tax breaks and support and participation for developing the other 27 acres of land. Whereas if we do good things that then the politicians can market as success stories, then we are going to be able to maximize our value in this portfolio. So what SURF does as a firm that we try to do, at least, is we try to work on projects where the economics are inherently and inextricably tied to impact. And this slide, more than any other, makes that common sense. If we do something that upsets people on this first project, they're going to make our lives difficult on the rest of the land. If we do something great, we'll be welcome in the community.
So Brian Murray has a question, and since he's attesting to the straw comment, I'm wondering if he's one of your LPs here, because he's wondering, so he's asking about the timeline of this.
I've tried to get Brian to invest every year for like 4 years now.
Oh, so maybe this is the question that'll put him over that hurdle. What is the timeline of this first project? And can you refresh our memories on what this first project is? I think this is when we toured Hempstead, the was that where we were standing on top of the parking lot?
Yeah.
And yeah.
So
And
we'll-
so
we'll-
in
I don't-
addition to that,
we're-
how far along are the architecture and construction docs? Those are all
So we
Brian's
haven't-
questions.
Okay, so Brian, we're starting from scratch. We have as of right zoning code. So we know exactly what we're allowed to build as of right by law. This rendering came from our architects as an initial rendering for discussions with the village. This particular rendering is 2 stories of parking. And I thought our architects had a creative idea in the fact that they've hidden the parking underneath this park. So you see this little staircase here to go up. I mean, this is one of like 27 different renders we have. This happens to be one of my favorites. But we're sitting here right next to the train station. What's attractive about the train station here is that it's a terminus. So trains don't go by at high speed. They're really quiet, and they drift into a stop and then they drift out at low speed. So it's actually super convenient and quiet. But we haven't really gone beyond the site rendering and feasibility study phase yet, just because that process is one that we want to do in partnership with the village. And we are 3 months away from a mayoral election, which we hope will be pivotal. Hempstead is, as I said, it's 98% Hispanic and African American. It's voted over 90% Democrat in the last 5 presidential elections. And for some reason, the first Republican mayor was recently elected, and he was the Republican mayor who used to be the high school basketball coach of Hempstead High, who notably was the basketball coach for Julius Erving. And so, great basketball coach, not a very effective mayor in terms of creating development. He's been very anti-development. And so what we wanted to make sure is that the process of designing the project and getting the final tax breaks are something that we can do in partnership with the administration. We sort of know that our negotiating over all those dynamics with the Republican administration is going to be significantly more challenging than Democrats. So we're kind of just postponing that process. We think that the process of architectural design approval and everything else we need to be shovel ready will be under 12 months. And so we hope to be in the ground in 2022.
Great, thanks. I guess we just have a few minutes left. Is there anything that you'd like to share, or should we talk about the gentrification, which would obviously risk that most OZ developers must consciously manage?
I mean, this is a real challenge and opportunity at the same time. I think our key argument here is that the downtown area of Hempstead, and with the best pictures here, we're not replacing any. First and foremost, we're not replacing any housing. All of our projects are building additional housing and a lot of affordable housing on parking lots that currently do not generate revenue for the community. We're also taking buildings that are single-story retail and converting them into housing. So, if this rollout happens as we hope, over the next 15 to 20 years, we'll add about 4,000 apartments to this downtown district. In general, we think that will alleviate some of the housing price pressure on the community. One of the reasons that people move into apartments in Long Island is because the cost. So if I can, I'm long-winded. Cut me off if this is too much, but the history of the suburbs around major MSAs is that as gentrification struck these inner neighborhoods like Queens and Brooklyn, people seeking the most affordable place to live were pushed into places like Long Island and other suburbs around these major MSAs. So as people are pushed into the suburbs, they think they're getting a lower rent on a house than they would on an apartment in Queens, for example. But the overall cost that they don't typically factor in, the maintenance on the houses, the real estate taxes on the houses, having to have a car where they otherwise didn't have to, and living, having to have multiple cars for a family because you could live a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles from a train station in the winter. All of those things make living in houses proportionately very expensive. And so when we calculate I don't have the materials here, but we can send it, when we calculate the total cost of living for people who live in apartments in areas like Mineola and Hempstead in apartments, it's much lower than, I'd say comparably amenitized houses in the area. So we're actually providing a lot. If we do what we want to do, we're going to provide a lot of more affordable houses. I mean, we also are going to be improving the neighborhood and improving the reputation of the neighborhood. So, some people could be upset that could result in their housing prices increase. I'm not sure I have a perfect answer for that.
Thanks. That was great, Greg. So one last question, and then we'll close. Is what can we do to help you?
I mean, I have a bunch of investors that I love that are already part of this. But the investors that I would love to have on our team are people who really care about the same mission as we do. Like I said, we're the people who are in our first round are relatively small. They're basically $2 million commitments that we have the right to bring back to $1 million. And the idea in that is to create a pool of people that have the capacity to do much major investing later. So when we have these other projects that might require people to either make long-term investments or other forms of investments that would be supportive, we want people to believe in the mission. So if there's people from this group that want to participate, call me.
Great. And on that note, I have taken the liberty of inserting your email into the chat window. If anyone would like to touch base with Greg, you can also email us at info@Impact Capital Forum to get in touch with Greg, but everyone can catch it. I guess so we're at time, and thank you so much for sharing this project and your thinking and all your research and your impact thinking and thesis. We sincerely appreciate leaders like you taking the lead in really putting this capital to work, because we still have, I think last I checked, $5.5 or more trillion of unrealized capital gains to unlock from originally anticipated. So,
you know what I want? I want $1 billion from somebody who had Bitcoin. I want $1 billion from Bitcoin guys.
That's great. Diversify your portfolio. Great opportunity to do so, because Bitcoin's only going down, huh?
I just think sell and do something good with your newfound wealth.
All right. Thank you so much, Greg. Great to see you as always. Thank you to everyone for joining as well. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Bye.